Hello everyone and welcome to the Winecast. This cast is about Burgundy, one of France's premier wine regions and maybe its most storied region. Some consumers find Burgundy a bit intimidating because in addition to the AOC system that governs quality wine in France, Burgundy adheres to a parallel classification system for its vineyards with all sorts of fancy phrases like Grand Cru and Premier Cru that can clutter up a label and leave a wine buyer more than a little bit perplexed. But like most things about wine, once you get the gist of the system, it makes a lot of sense and can be a real help to consumers in making good purchases. So let's go ahead and have a look. Burgundy, or Bourgogne in French, is in east-central France, sandwiched between Champagne to the north and the Rhone Valley to the south. Burgundy is really about two grapes, though there are a handful of others floating around. And those two grapes are Chardonnay, which makes up about 60% of total vineyard acreage, and Pinot Noir. Aligoté, a white grape, and Gamay, a red, play a modest supporting role, as do a truly tiny number of other grapes grown here and there throughout the region. But when someone talks about having a red Burgundy, she means she's drinking a wine that's 100% Pinot Noir. And if someone claims to be sipping on a white Burgundy, then it's Chardonnay that's in the glass. Burgundy is divided into 5 main sub-regions, and let's have a quick look at these. While most of Burgundy clusters around the Saône River, there's an outlying region, about 80 miles or 120 kilometers away from the main body of Burgundy, called Chablis, that's famous for its crisp, tart, and steely Chardonnay. The northernmost part of the main area of Burgundy is called the Côte de Nuits, named for the city of Nuits-Saint-Georges and close to the important and famous city of Dijon. It's known as a producer of high quality and often very expensive Pinot Noir. To the south of the Côte de Nuits is the Côte de Beaune, known mostly for its Chardonnay production, though it's an important Pinot producer as well. And together, both the Côte de Beaune and the Côte de Nuits are called the Côte d'Or, or the Golden Slope, because they're the home of some of Burgundy's most prestigious and well-regarded vineyards. Just to the south of the Côte d'Or is the Côte Chalonnaise, also known as a Chardonnay producer, a trend that continues as we move south to the Mâconnais near the city of Mâcon. We'll explore each of these areas in greater detail shortly. Lastly, Burgundy is also famous for its 4-tiered classification system for its vineyards, which are known as climats, or specifically delineated areas based on terroir, and sometimes, if these areas are or were walled, as clos. This system divides these vineyards into Grand Cru, Premier Cru, Village, or regional quality levels. Let's look at each one of these classifications in more detail. At the top of this classification are Grand Cru, or Great Growth Sites. There are 33 of these divided between Chablis and the 2 parts of the Côte d'Or. Each one of these vineyard sites is considered its own AOC and so designated on the label. Since 1990, the words Grand Cru have been required to appear on wine labels, making recent vintages of this quality level easy to spot. Prior to 1990, some producers, helpfully, put the phrase on the label, but some did not. There are over 600 Premier Cru, or first-growth vineyard sites in Burgundy, mostly in the Côte d'Or, but also in Chablis and the Côte Chalonnaise. These vineyards are not regarded as separate AOCs, but as part of the AOC of the commune or village in which they're found. The name of the village will appear on the label, and usually the term Premier Cru will as well, along with the name of the specific Premier Cru vineyard. Village-level vineyards get their AOC status from the village within which they reside, and there are a total of 44 such villages in Burgundy. Prior to 1990, unless you had access to a list of either the 44 villages or the 33 Grand Cru vineyards, or maybe had memorized them, it was surprisingly easy to confuse the two, as the names of villages and vineyards could sometimes be very similar. Finally, regional-level vineyards produce grapes that can only qualify for one of the 23 appellations that cover the whole of Burgundy. And wines made at this level can have their grapes sourced from vineyards all over the region, as opposed to other levels where the grapes have to be sourced from the village-level vineyards in a specific village, or from specific Premier or Grand Cru vineyards. The biggest and most important regional AOC is AOC Bourgogne, the generic appellation for reds, whites, and rosés sourced from throughout the region. Also important are a regional AOC for sparkling wines, and one specifically for wines made from the Aligoté grape. So, what exactly makes a vineyard site a Grand Cru versus a Premier Cru versus a village, etc., etc.? Well, the answer has to do with monks and with slopes, which the French call côtes. See, though grapes have been grown in this area for millennia, it was the Cistercian monks during the Middle Ages who first identified different parcels of ground where grapes grew differently from the way they did in other plots. Though their observations weren't anywhere near as detailed or systematized as the modern classification, they did lay the groundwork for thinking about terroir in Burgundy, and later observers would refine the insights of the Cistercians, with the consensus coming to be that the quality of a vineyard was often related to where it lay on one of the different côtes, or hill slopes, that made up the different subregions of Burgundy. Generally speaking, the weakest vineyard sites were either at the foot of the slope or low on the slope, while the best sites occupied positions higher up the incline. Why? Well, there are several factors at play, but the most important of which has to do with the latitude of Burgundy on the globe and the angle of the sun at that latitude. The Côte d'Or is at the 47th parallel north, about the same latitude as Seattle, much of the northern United States, and Quebec. At this latitude, at the beginning of summer in late June, when the grapes are starting to ripen, the sun is fairly high in the sky, and grapes at all of the vineyard sites are getting a lot of direct sunlight. But by the end of summer, say late September, as anyone from Seattle or anywhere else on 47 degrees north knows, the sun is lower in the sky, and grapes on flat ground or low to the slope will be getting sunlight at an angle that will limit the exposure of some of the vines to direct sunlight. But vines higher up the slope will still be getting direct sunlight. This exposure is particularly true for vines in a sort of sweet spot, about midway up the slope. Grapes at these locations got ripe more consistently than grapes elsewhere, developing not just more sugar, but also a more complex flavor profile. And it was these sites that were designated as Grand and Premier Cru vineyards during the 20th century. This difference in terroir based on slope is a key basis for the distinction between the different vineyard quality classifications. And if all of this talk about fine distinctions between vineyard sites sounds familiar, you might be remembering it from the cast on German wine classification, where we saw that the Burgundian four-tier model was the inspiration for the VDP's independent classification system of their members' vineyards. It's also been an influential system as regions elsewhere in France and beyond have thought about classifying their vineyard sites based on terroir. And speaking of other regions in France, it's important to remember the key difference between the Burgundian system and that other famous French classification, Bordeaux. In Bordeaux, it's the chateau or producers that are classified, not the plots of ground they get their grapes from. But in Burgundy, it's all about the pieces of land. Let's round out this cast by taking a quick look at the major regions in Burgundy. We'll start with Chablis. Chardonnay is king in Chablis. There's a tiny appellation called Saint-Brie that grows Sauvignon Blanc, but other than that, it's all Chard all the time in Chablis. And the Chablis here is made in a particularly crisp, acidic style that's famous for its green apple and gunflint notes, and is considered a very pure expression of Chardonnay. A lot of these qualities in the wine have to do with the region's cold climate. It's closer to parts of Champagne than it is to the Côte d'Or, making it a challenge to ripen the grapes every year. Also, in keeping with the ideal of purity, Chablis are traditionally unoaked, though some producers are, controversially, experimenting with that style. There's one Grand Cru vineyard in Chablis, divided into 7 named parcels, and 40 Premier Cru vineyards. The general, entry-level appellation for Chablis is AOC Chablis, and if you see Petit Chablis on a label, consider passing it by, as wines given this designation were made from grapes grown in areas with relatively poor sun exposure and soil quality. The northernmost part of the Côte d'Or is the Côte de Nuits, and this area is dominated by Pinot, accounting for about 90% of total production. There are 24 Grand Cru vineyards here, and almost all of them produce Pinot exclusively. These are some of the most famous vineyards in the world, like Romanée-Conti, Clos de Vougeot, and Chambertin. And wines made from grapes grown in these and their peer vineyards can command stratospheric prices, if you can even manage to get your hands on any of them at all. Just to the south of the Côte de Nuits is the Côte de Beaune, named for the city of Beaune, a very important commercial center in the Burgundy trade. Though at least half of this area's plantings are Pinot Noir, The Côte de Beaune is most famous for its Chardonnay, and 7 out of its 8 Grand Cru vineyards produce only Chard, while the 8th also produces a little bit of Pinot. These vineyards are world famous too, and expect to pay handsomely for wines made from their grapes. The white Burgundies will usually cost less than comparable red Burgundies. Both of these areas, again, collectively are known as the Côte d'Or and have lots of highly regarded Premier Cru vineyards, and village-level wines from here won't come cheap either. Moving to the south again, we come to the Côte Chalonnaise. While the majority of production here is still driven by Chardonnay and Pinot, much of Burgundy's aligoté comes from the Côte Chalonnaise. There are no Grand Cru vineyards in this area, but there are 140 Premier Cru vineyards that produce highly regarded wines, but the Côte Chalonnaise may be most important as a source for grapes blended with other grapes from throughout Burgundy to make regional-level wines. Finally, the southernmost portion of Burgundy is the Mâconnais. Chardonnay rules the roost here, but you can find some Pinot Noir and Gamay, a very important grape from the region just south of the Mâconnais, Beaujolais. Both of these red grapes are made into still red wines and rosés, but in small quantities compared to Chardonnay. There are currently no Grand or Premier Cru vineyards in the Mâconnais, but this may have more to do with internal French politics in the wine industry than with the actual quality of Mâconnais vineyard sites, as there are several very highly regarded village-level appellations, most famously Puy-Foussay, and there's a movement afoot to get some vineyard sites in the Mâconnais classified as Premier Cru. I'm going to end this cast here, but I'd still like to spend some time going over Burgundy labels, especially so you can see the different quality indications on these labels. So look for a supplement with that information on it in the near future. I hope this cast has been informative and helpful to you in making some better sense out of the Burgundy region and its wines. If so, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm your host, the Unknown Winecaster, and I'm out. Always enjoy the grape, but always enjoy it responsibly.